Thank you, Mary. Thank you, and thank you for everyone for joining us this morning and to our panel. So we're talking about reclaiming networks today, global and local. We'll try to find out a little bit more about what that means to each of us, but I just want to briefly introduce all of you here this morning, and maybe the first thing I can do is to ask each of you to introduce yourselves, because you do this so much better. So to your left, you have Stefan Benchoam, and next to him, Wafaa, Bilal, Katy, Diamond Hammer, and Chana, Sheldon. Stefan, would you like to maybe just say a few words about what you do and how your practice relates to networks in many ways?
Sure. Thanks, Renaud, and thanks everybody for being here. Thanks to the panelists. I'm coming from Guatemala. I'm an artist in training, and I've been working in art in Guatemala in a local context for a while now. As soon as I started my practice, I realized that there wasn't really necessarily a network to participate in, either locally or internationally. And that even though Guatemala has an incredibly rich context and really incredibly sophisticated and effervescent art scene, it was pretty isolated, and it has been historically. So it was very soon that a few friends of us joined as artists and to open up a few spaces for people to come together and to see the types of exhibitions and projects and talks and lectures and performances that we were into that nobody else was doing. With that in mind, we founded Proyectos Ultravioleta, which originally was conceived as a platform for experimentation in contemporary art. Of course, our idea of contemporary art is incredibly broad, so anything could fit the bill. But we quickly started to invent ways to which to support the practice. Originally, we would do parties after our exhibitions to draw in a younger crowd to the shows that would normally be more interested in getting their booze on rather than culture. And soon enough, we changed our model. We started applying as a non-for-profit, then realized that the people that were funding our projects, even though they were being incredibly generous, giving us the funds that we needed, they were actually not necessarily understanding the ethos of the projects that we were doing. So we switched our model yet again to where we're at right now. It's a hybrid project. It's working locally as a type of Kunsthalle still, responding to the context and to the rich history that we've got. And internationally, we're raising funds in art fairs. That way we get to promote the works of the artists that we're working on, which are not only Guatemalan, but international. And at the same time, we get to promote the projects and the types of thinking of ideas and elaborating connections that we like to do. And so that way we kind of kill two birds with one stone. We generate funds for the project and are able to do the things that we have to do without having to pay the bills to anybody else other than ourselves. Additionally, with Jessica Caire, we founded NuMu, which is Guatemala's first and only contemporary art museum. Our claim to fame is that it's one of the most visited museums in the world for contemporary art per square meter, because it's about 1 square meter, right? But it's open 24/7. We're really trying to challenge what a contemporary art museum should be this day and age. It responds primarily to the local context. And that way we've been able to articulate a network of friends, both locally and internationally, to get the word around that Guatemala is actually pretty nice and there's an incredible art scene, and to kind of have that exchange altogether.
So it's interesting because this is a network that starts in a kind of small way in Guatemala as an artist-run space that brings together a community of artists, and then finds kind of ports of entry with other artists and artistic scenes around the world, and participating at art fairs in order to do this as well, finding support, finding new communities of new audiences in a way. I'm just wondering if we can contrast this with your experience as an artist, Wafaa.
Thank you very much. My name is Wafaa Bilal. I am an Iraqi-American artist. And when I arrived here in the 90s, I realized that there is a duality in my living. I am partly living in the United States as physically, but my thoughts are mentally are related to Iraq. And I figure out these are two different zones. One is the conflict zone and one is the comfort zone. And I needed a way to connect these two zones without imposing So my work shifted from an artist who making a statement, imposing on others, into being a trigger of platform to engage people. And the work slowly shifted from galleries, museums, into literally the internet and networking people that way. In 2007, I launched a project called Shoot an Iraqi when I built a robot that shoot paintball at me, and the project was titled Shoot an Iraqi and then Domestic Tension. And as a result, we have 80 million people visit the site, 70,000 people shot at me. And from there, I realized as an artist and who like to engage people, we should not be confined into the gallery space or a museum, but rather enter everybody's home and offices. This way, there is a true dialogue between people. Most recently, in the images you see in front of you, in January of this year, I launched a project called 168 hours and 1 second. In this project, the objective is to raise funding to build a library of the College of Fine Art in Baghdad, which was destroyed in 2003 in the invasion of Iraq. And to beyond our expectation, we set up a goal for 10,000, and we raised $60,000 within 1 month. And luckily, now we collected 200% of the books we needed, and there are 4 other museums, 3 in Canada, 1 in the state, sign up for it. And you could see this is truly reaching to people, and not only opposing war, but rather rebuilding as well.
Thank you. And Katy, you're an art journalist, so you write about projects such as these ones. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about the way in which you conceive networks?
Thank you to Art Basel, and thank you, Renaud, and the other panelists. My name is Katy Diamond-Hamer, and I am an art writer. And in regards to networks within the global and local context, for me, I mean, it's imperative for journalists to be able to travel the world to look at art and to communicate with artists within this international context. I'm based in Brooklyn, New York, and I will say that having gone to places, especially within the art, contemporary art context, that have been, shall we say, social economically challenged versus very wealthy locations within the global market, have really influenced me in the way that I write and what I write about, and also my understanding of what contemporary art is.
Thank you. And last but not least, Chana.
Thank you for having me today, and to all my panelists. My name is Chana Sheldon. I'm Executive Director of Locust Projects here in Miami. Locust Projects was founded in 1998 by Miami artists as a space to explore and experiment in the visual arts, really outside of the contemporary market. And fast forward about 20 years, and we are still very much artist-focused, giving artists the opportunity to create the work they really need to make, often their dream projects. And over the years, looking back, can really see how the support that we have given these artists over the years were really at critical moments of their career, and allowed them to use us almost as a stepping stone for their future projects, whether they're in art fairs now or at big museums. The programming that we also do expands into more educational initiatives as well that are created in direct response to the local art community needs. As a kind of small to mid-size organization, we have a lot of flexibility. So unlike the museums, in this cultural landscape, we have the ability to respond very fast. So if artists need studio visits by curators, we can create a program for that. If they need a roundtable event so that they can talk about topics they're interested in right now, we try to provide that. So we try to really see ourselves as a flexible space to bring those local and national conversations together.
Great, thank you. And to kick off the conversation, I want to actually stay with you, Chana, because I think that it's always good to start with the local. And you're the representative for Miami in many ways. I wonder what you think. We all here for the fair. Many of us come every year and have done so for many years. And we come to the fair, I think few of us on the panel come to the fair to purchase works, but we come to the fair really understanding that this is a platform for exchange as well as a platform for commerce, and that we're meeting friends, colleagues, and indeed our sort of international network, the ones that we build individually for ourselves. We get to meet people in that network here for the week of the fairs. So I wonder if you can speak a little bit about how the fair has maybe impacted the local art scene in Miami and how that has been felt at Locust Project.
Sure. This is a very good question. Having the art fairs in town are, of course, a wonderful thing. They support artists with sales, but there's a lot of ways to support artists in other ways that they need. One thing that we see is obviously this is a wonderful networking opportunity. Everyone's on our home turf. There's press, there's curators, there's artists, there are gallerists, and of course it leads to wonderful conversations and eventually collaborations. Last year, for instance, we had a show with Martha Friedman, who's a New York-based artist, mid-career, and just a few months before her show with us here in Miami, her New York gallery closed. And suddenly we found this artist who was doing something really ambitious, really experimental, with a huge platform with no representation. And it became a really beautiful thing where the opportunity of having this influx of visitors in town, got to see the show, got to speak with the artist, see her new work, and it led to shows for her where she's in New York right now at the IFA Great Hall. She has a show that is totally related to what we did last year. She also has a show at the Henry Art Gallery coming up next year. And, that's like the best case scenario of how having everyone in town really helps us. And, for local artists, just yesterday, Locust Projects participates in one of the art fairs here, and we are showing an artist who's based here now named Philip Smith, and he was given the prize for the Artadia Nara Award. And this is an under-recognized artist that was so generous to donate to our booth and help us fundraise as an organization, and received recognition because all of these curators that don't usually get to see his work got to see it, and he got a wonderful grant.
And so in a way, the art fair, Art Basel, but other art fairs as well have given the opportunity for local artists in Miami to tap into networks that are broader, national networks, international networks. I then want to transition maybe to you, Stefan, and ask a similar question, because Art Basel, of course, prides itself to have specific connections to Latin America. I think more than 10% of the galleries represented here are from Latin America. You're showing at NADA, like Locust Projects, with Proyectos, Ultravioleta, and I wonder if you can sort of elucidate a little bit what those networks and connections with Latin America are.
Yeah, I mean, whether we like to admit it or not, art fairs are the new gathering place for artists, for creators, for writers, for collectors, for people in the arts altogether. I mean, I think we've been a little bit in denial for a while that that's the case, but that's what it is, right? Luckily, though, there's different fairs that are like pushing the limits on what a fair could be, right? It's not just a marketplace for art, but there's also an emphasis in creating these types of conversations, other professional programs, oftentimes like fairs where they do like even like professional meetings outside of the fair program that are close to the public, you know? So I think that's like a good starting point in general for fairs and what they're doing and what they can be now. And just then, I guess coming back to Miami, I mean, it is like the gateway from Latin America into the U.S. in a way, and it is also a gateway from the U.S. into Latin America. So it's that door, and a lot of people are coming from all over, and that gives projects like us, like Ultravioleta, that are maybe not robust economically, a chance to become like robust, like in terms of the connections that we do, right? We've been operating It was actually from a trip that I took in Puerto Rico about 6 years ago in a network called the Economies of Friendship. And what we do is like just come together with friends and try to figure out different ways of like collaborating with one another, overseeing, for example, if we're thinking of doing an exhibition, we don't have budget, I guess, for shipping or of course for insurance. So what we'll do is like make an exhibition of works by instructions, right? So I think what these like fairs represent is a possibility to come together, you know, and of course like-minded people will always like think and try to figure out ways to like complotar, like coming together and like finding other possibilities to circulate works and ideas and develop new friendships. I know I'm sounding idealistic, but that's kind of like the experience that's been for me in a way. It's all about like collaborating with like a broader and broader and broader group of like-minded friends and individuals.
And Wafaa, similarly, this idea of the fair as a platform for people to meet and maybe connect on a deeper level. I'm thinking that some of the projects that you do, outside of the fair now, we can look at what an exhibition is and what some of your art projects are, what the library project has meant at the Art Gallery of Windsor, and the kind of communities, the kind of networks that these projects, generate. I wonder if you can.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier the role of the artist for me at least is shifted from to kind of a trigger for a platform, and the space become the platform, the physical platform. So, for example, with the library project, it started at Windsor. It took 6 years for us to mount it there, but once it was there, it was an open platform for people to come and not only to participate but to change the outcome. So the platform and the project is an open-ended. It has no ended state. This way, I think by opening it up, we are able to engage the community in changing the outcome of political, social issues. So the model is very different than you have a gallery or a museum. In terms of fairs, I welcome them a lot because, as you mentioned, museums have a very long schedule, and it doesn't necessarily interact with the contemporary issues, but rather we see at the forum just like things shift very fast because it is constructed for and open to the public for a few days, and the issues that is a political or social issues could infiltrate these fairs, whether in a dialogue or the work itself as well.
Your definition of the network earlier in your introduction was very interesting to me because you spoke about your work getting out of the gallery and out of the museum and into people's homes, so that the network is, in your definition, is something that is not necessarily a succession of friendships or professional relationships and connections, but it's rather a way in which the work itself can spread. And
yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think about the platform you trigger, then it has no end state. And also, when you open it up to the network, the people who are participating, they write part of the narrative of that project. So the engagement is not necessary for just funding the project, but rather to write the narrative of the ending narrative of that project. And I see it as most of my work is social political. So for us, I can no longer impose on people, but rather open the space for them to come together for a true dialogue.
And I'm sorry, staying with you a little longer because I like this idea of going into directly into people's home. How does this really work, and how do you achieve this kind of engagement?
Really good question. So in the past early work, I mounted physical work in art spaces, but then with the connectivity we have with the internet. No longer the white wall is the space for meeting. So there is, in a way, the virtual platform is out there. And then there is a connection always between these two spaces. As I mentioned, in Sudan, Iraqi, We had over 80 million people visited from 128 countries. And the most thing important come out of that is the chat room, when literally it was open to everybody to participate in it. And you could see no longer I need to impose or inform people of the war in Iraq or other social issues, but rather you have the crowd itself controlling itself and conversing with each other. So in a sense is you create something and you have it people allowed to come physically, virtually into it. This way, I think the outcome we desire as artists and the engagement we desire as artists really not confined to a physical place anymore.
And Katy, as a writer and as a journalist, you're now part of this process that Wafaa is describing. Beyond the space is the writing, the framework of wording that surrounds the work. And so, what kind of network do you?
Well, in a way, I mean, one thing I would say is that I really like what he was saying about the virtual space. And I do think that we all participate within that space, whether we're artists or not, with through the realms of Instagram. And I have how I got started as a writer. I was actually trained as an artist was through a blog that I have called Eyes Towards the Dove. And I started it nearly 10 years ago, and I've treated that platform as I would treat any other magazine and with my texts. So I would say that regarding that interior space, there is something very special about, the internet in this day and age, and how really anyone can enter into that space and choose how long or how little they want to spend there. And then I kind of wanted to address a little bit, going back to the context of the fair within the local versus the global. One of the things that I love about an art fair is how, even though booths might be different sizes and, Art Basel might be the largest versus some of the smaller fairs, there's something about the evening of a playing field where all the galleries can participate and have this venue that they can really curate on their own to some extent. And then as visitors, whether professionals or just people, from the general public who want to come see these exhibitions and the works from countries they may not be able to visit, I find very special. But then, as someone like myself who does get to travel and see these galleries in their, in situ, really, I love that comparison between an experience at an art fair versus a quote-unquote, real-life experience in a particular country. And for me, that experience has been very, very special within my own practice because, sometimes just finding an art gallery can be really challenging. It's can be hidden behind walls and doors, and you have to knock here and there. And, I've traveled all over, and galleries that could be at Art Basel or somewhere else, the whole context of that sense of discovery within the fair versus within the quote-unquote real world, I find very interesting.
I think this is maybe just earlier in the green room we were talking about the title of this talk and this idea of reclaiming the network. And jokingly I said, who are we reclaiming it from? I wonder if one of you has an answer to this, or if we can maybe think a little further about this idea of reclaiming this network that supposedly we have lost, and what network it is that we have lost.
I actually found that the word reclaiming is actually somewhat problematic because I don't necessarily see, at least within my role in my realm, I don't see that there's a sense of reclaiming. I do feel that there can be an individual experience that can then become a collective experience, and that collective experience could be either, through the internet or through social media, or it could be through reading a text. So for me, there's something about, I guess, this absorption versus of a network and I guess a dichotomy around that then an individual can take and share collectively versus, I guess, a reclaiming within the global context, because, again, I don't know if I have the power to do that, personally speaking, as a writer. I do like what Wafaa was saying previously about the concept of comfort versus conflict. And that, to me, felt really relevant in regards to reclaiming, because we have this sense of comfort, even right now, versus what might be interior, within all of us, whether it's within the contemporary art world or personally, that internal conflict. So I really liked what you said there.
So in regard to your question, I would, through a couple terms here maybe. One is decentralization, and the other one is distribution channels. And I think in terms of decentralization, many of us as artists in the past, we were confined into the physical space. And you could see by, we in a way reclaim our audience. And our audience, not necessarily the one who come and visit the gallery, as you mentioned, come and have a drink and leave and nobody would look at the artwork. So in a sense, we want a real engagement. And I think when we went beyond the physical space, we were able to decentralize that space and include other people who might not be necessary wanted to be in an art place. Then in terms of distribution channel, the technology allowed us a greater space than the physical one. And that is a crucial issue, because then let's say performances. Performances is like one of these medium. There are not. There are life, and they impact because it's not mediated, right? And it used to be always confined into that physical space. But we could see artists are engaging others by leaving the physical space into the virtual, and you could see how reclaiming that space become larger and larger and larger.
In this process that you're describing, I can see a risk, however, for each of us to maybe, in the process of decentralization, feel uprooted or lose track of the experience of the viewer if it's entirely digital. In the kind of dichotomy that we're, lose track of the context, I guess is what I'm suggesting. And in the dichotomy that you were describing, Katy, I wonder if the biggest one isn't this sort of local global opposition, and whether we're making work or shaping our organizations to address the kind of concerns or to address local audiences, or whether we try to shift our language to speak to a more global, decentralized, uprooted digital audience. And maybe, Chana, that you're
I can speak about in terms of coming from Locust projects and being a very artist-centric, process-based, having a process-based mission, really. We really support the initial idea and the need to make the work, and we really stress the importance of the process, of the installation period, and the process that the artists are going through as they're continuing to examine what they're trying to create. A lot of the work that we're doing is really starting with an idea and then having the artist build it on site. So it's completely out of their usual context, out of their comfort zone, and going through those weeks of developing the idea and that experience, trying to bring in some of the local community to see that process and share it with them, and have the artists talk about the work like the day after it was installed, and them still not really knowing exactly what it is such a beautiful part of what we're doing, and how it's kind of free of these more global market focuses.
And Stefan, does your language shift in the work that you do in Guatemala City or elsewhere?
Well, I think one of the biggest risks that we've faced and that we quickly identified was like not losing our voice within all of this. because it's very easy to come to an international platform where you're alongside galleries from the main centers, traditional centers, whether it's New York, London, or wherever that would be, and try to do what they are doing and fail at it, because you're never going to be able to put on a New York show if you're not in New York, right? I think it goes back to De Andrade, the Brazilian philosopher and thinker, and his anthropophagia, this idea of like cannibalization, right? Because we're far away from these centers, what we need to do is just get what we like, what we're able to approach, and then make it our own. Eat it up, tear it apart, and then make it our own. And so that's kind of what we try to do. Of course, there's like a risk in the sense that a lot of times these fairs and platforms, the only thing that they offer is like very short glimpses at what people are doing. And as soon as like people don't realize that it's in a similar language to what they're used to seeing, they can be very quick to discard it, right? At the beginning, that can be demoralizing, of course, because you're like desperately in a way trying to like grow for that attention and you know, like get your voice heard. But I think there's like an actual thing in like being constant and just like really pushing to show what these artists are, what the work is about, and just staying true to yourself and staying authentic. That really brings something important, you know, in terms of us, like where the gallery, I like what you were saying of like where these galleries are at physically. We've had 3 different spaces and they're like pretty bonkers, all of them. We started on the 2nd floor in Zone 1 before any gallery was there, which is a historical center of Guate City. And then we went to the 2nd basement of a shopping center, a schizophrenic place, you know, like alongside like gun shops, billiards, restaurants. And we just really wanted to be around people that were not exposed to art necessarily. And now we've got a space inside of what used to be Guatemala's biggest wood mill, right? So we're always just like trying to like find the intelligence of each space and try to understand like the context that we're operating in to create an experience there, you know? And then when we come out to an international fair or to an international platform, how to try to relate that experience into this broader context and hopefully be heard. And I mean, if we're not, that's okay, right? Like, it's not like...
Just wanted to add one
Sure.
thing. I think it's always about the local. You know, I mean, we come from, if we are coming from different places, trying to raise awareness about an issue that's far away, you have to filter it through a language, a local language, in order to engage people and bring them to the platform. But the risk of losing the unique voice, I think, I'm not concerned about it, because we go back to Marshall McLuhan and the idea of the global village. I think we see that already existed. You know, I mean, the unique voices are, I think, shrinking more and more, because we are affecting each other, whether we are aware of it or not, through these technologies that already existed now.
And in this idea of decentralization, there's also the fact that there are networks that exist already that are simply not part of maybe the most dominant or most visible networks in this kind of global art world that we, you know, maybe intuitively could define for ourselves. And in the work that I think, Wafaa, you've been doing in Canada and Detroit, Michigan, you could tap into specific local networks that actually related to a much more global context and transnational
and
context.
There's almost a collaboration between the local and the global. You know, for example, with shooting Iraqi, the local were able to sustain me, but only in connection with the global, because everybody is in contact with each other, whether to send food to the gallery, to send ammunition, to send water. And the same thing with the library. The local are the one who physically put in the books on in a performance every week, but the global is the one who is sending these books. And you can see a dialogue, even sometimes it's not a direct dialogue, but is a true dialogue, in order to engage and sustain these projects.
I'm just going to make a quick announcement, and I think I'm going to ask my last question. So if you have questions to ask, we'll open it to the floor in a moment and start formulating them or preparing your questions. My last question was to stay with this idea of, or for you all to stay with this idea of transnational networks and to try to, you know, foster, enrich develop further those maybe those global networks that are a little bit less visible or a little bit less dominant. And I wonder if one of you or two of you might have something to comment about this.
Sure. We recently had the opportunity to partner with a few other alternative art spaces based here in Miami, Boss Fisher, Dimensions Variable, and Cannonball to bring the Common Field convening to Miami. And this was a national conference really focused as a networking opportunity for alternative art spaces, artists, art organizers, and it was 3 days of hundreds of people having conversation about very, relevant immediate topics. Through panel discussions, breakout sessions, we were able to commission artists locally to give them some exposure. And it was a really great way of doing this in our city and bringing all these people here outside of a time like this where there's just so many people. It was very focused.
An example of tapping into these two networks, the library project, 168 hours and 1 second. When I initiated that project, I really wanted to be, the seed wanted to be from Baghdad, from the College of Fine Arts. So I asked the student, the faculty to generate a list because I didn't feel I have the right or we have the right here to impose what kind of books they would receive into the library. So we built a team of faculty, students, and also we have journalists who are writing for us what is happening there. And you could see there is a dialogue between the people who are donating these books from all over the world and the local in Baghdad in order to rebuild that library.
Katy?
One thing that I wanted to say in regards to a little bit what we were talking about earlier, I liked what Stefan brought up about language. And I realized that within the context of the global and the local, for me, I guess from my point of view, I love the fact that visual language is universal. And that no matter what, everyone in the world can basically appreciate an image. Where I find it to be most interesting within the context of the network and even maybe the concept of the reclaiming is the fact that based on where that person happens to be in the world, they probably will have a different understanding of whatever that visual might be, even if they can read the signs of what makes it up or what makes it be. There is a difference in perception based on, I think, culture and where in the world someone is. So as far as my own practice, I'm obviously from New York, I'm an American, and that whatever I see within the global context will be filtered through that, for better or for worse. And I think that my goal is to continue to broaden my own visual scope so that I can, feed that to, I guess, a local and a global network.
So do you think that your practice in some sense has also become one of translation?
Definitely, I do. I mean, I think that as an art writer, we're constantly translating the signs and symbols of visual language in the best way possible. And for myself, I tend to use the written word and language to try to communicate not only within or to an academic reader, but also I try to use language that will communicate to the general public as well, to try to really expand the conversation as far as I can.
Thank you. So I want to open it to the floor and see if there's any questions. There's one question. If you just wait for the mic, there it is.
Hi, I'm a little late so I didn't hear the whole conversation, I apologize. But on the topic of crowdfunding, how do you see the connection with Art Basel's new program that is doing Art Basel cities, and the first city now is Buenos Aires. So there was a lot of talk between global and local. And so my question is specific to that. In the future, we're going to have cities that are going to be collaborating as kind of like a satellite part of the festival. How do you see crowdfunding playing into that model?
It's a good question, and I thank you for keeping us on track, because we haven't talked much about crowdfunding, and this was our way to reclaiming something, I guess. But I also want to say that I think a lot of the conversations that we've had in this last 45 minutes are really the kind of basic conversation behind understanding, one's position behind crowdfunding, and how one may explain, translate, present a project to an audience and a community of supporters that is, that is beyond the local reach of the organization or the artist project. So I think in some ways that I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to maybe stress those connections. But specifically on the topic of crowdfunding and Art Basel's initiative with Kickstarter, I think a few of you are well-placed to, 3 of you are well-placed to speak of it because you went through the process. And Chana, maybe you...
Sure. We had the opportunity to participate in the Kickstarter under Art Basel about 2 years ago with a very ambitious project by Daniel Arsham, who is a Miami-born artist and was doing a big homecoming with a project that was challenging both for us and for him. And having the chance to put it out there months in advance, talk about the project, and do outreach on an international level brought so many networks together. I felt that it also was very much mirroring who we are as an organization. We pride ourselves on being very accessible, we're free to the public, and it really gave power to individuals to support us with $5 donations, $25 donations, and really help us see the project through. And because we had the opportunity of showing this project at a very busy time of year, it was during Art Basel 2 years ago, they got to see it come to fruition as well. So it was quite successful for us that way.
Yeah, I must add, crowdfunding is just really not about just the success of the artist, but also rather the success of the crowd, because there is a reward in it for them. And we go back to the idea of decentralization. In the past, artists either depend on their self-funding or institution or individual funds, but now we see a very different model. And so far I launched 3 successful Kickstarter campaign, and the last one, it was January. I mentioned earlier, I raised $60,000 within 1 month, which is 600% of the original goal we want. And I kept in mind there is something has to be as a reward for the crowd. Not only the book, the money they donate, it's going to go to the Library of Baghdad, but rather I wanted a reminder of their donations. So every book they donate, they get a white blank book to be on their shelf. And you could see that exchange encourage people to become part of the network and you trying to build. Yeah, exactly, engagement, that's a good word.
And Wafaa, you've seen sustained and continued engagement from some of the 1,000+ donors that have contributed to your project?
Yeah, I mean, now we have a team of volunteers in maybe 5 or 6 cities who completely donating their times, not just the money. I have a team of librarians who love the project, and they took it on themselves. Not only to index in every single book, but also to build a future index for the library. And they're continuously doing organization, outreach, and our effort continue. And it really, I think it has everything to do with the intention of beyond these projects. When you have a good intention and you open that platform, people will come and participate and keep participating in it.
And on the topic, to bring back the question on the topic of looking at this network or generating more of a network of crowdfunding through pairing 2 cities, Miami, Buenos Aires in one case, or I don't know if you have any thoughts. Stefan, I saw you writing something down on your network.
Yeah, unfortunately, I must confess that I don't know much about the Art Cities program. However, I could speak a little bit about the experience that we had with NuMu on crowdfunding through Art Basel's Kickstarter. We were crowdfunding for Joaquin, who's an avant-garde musician from Guatemala from the 60s, who, at the lack of funding for his experimentation in electroacoustic music, he ultimately developed his own instruments that are analogous, and that when you start to play them together by hand, like a group of them, you start to get a layer of the sounds that he was doing electronically. Joaquin's a genius. He's experimented in music and sculpture in a way, like in an intuitive way, and also in literature. And he's 85 now, and he was like completely forgotten. Guatemala has no supports for the arts, whether private or public. And so we really saw, even though this was a project that we were like working on for 3 or 4 years before that, we started it with Alejandro Turun and Carlos Morales. We really saw the Kickstarter as an opportunity to expand that network and to, in a way, collectively change that history of Guatemala and the cultural landscape, right? So we called it, our campaign was, let's make art history together. That was like our claim. And so what we were pushing was for people to come in and really change like the fate in a way of this like genius. By doing that, people got really turned on by the idea of doing it collectively. And we were able to raise enough funds to record 4 of his most emblematic works. And with that, also make a live presentation in Guatemala's National Theater to 2,000 people with over 100 musicians. You know, like since then, that was like a really great opportunity because we were able to also like talk to different curators about the project, to talk to different like collectors about the project, to talk to different enthusiasts about the project. And it's luckily kind of like spread a little bit like wildfire to the point where he's actually going to be presenting his first ever symphony in the next edition of Documenta. You know, so it's like a Cinderella story in a way. And what's lovely about that is that collectively we were able to change that around, right? Whether it's like the $5 donations or other people that were able to contribute further, it's something that we all feel that we've been able to do together, and that's in a way priceless.
One thing I wanted to add was that through my website, I Swear to Dove has always been independent, and many blogs and websites usually do choose to do crowdfunding to some extent to help run their websites. And recently, I guess it was 2 months ago in New York, I attended a panel on crowdfunding at the Kickstarter headquarters, featuring Ian Mackay from Fugazi and Brendan Stusoy, who is the editor-in-chief now of a new platform through Kickstarter called The Creative Independent, which is an online magazine that does all interviews. And it is through Kickstarter, but it's functioning somewhat independently, but underneath that larger umbrella. And the conversation tapped into the concept of crowdfunding versus what is it to be independent. And when you think about, you know, the artist as a singular person or the gallery as a singular unit, and then the writer as a unit, there is something about the independent that was at one point, you know, say in the 70s and 80s, defined through punk rock and through the punk system. And I think that what's happened now is that through crowdfunding, that quote unquote, you know, punk rock spirit is still there, but through that kind of local thread, if you will, there can be a larger global reach for, as you were describing, you know, an artist who was barely noticed and is now going to be performing at Documenta, you know. And I find that really special, and I think it's amazing that Art Basel has been able to create this initiative to allow these types of dialogues to fully expand.
Well, Katy, I think we have to leave it here, but what great words to leave it on. Let's all continue to be punk rock and make wonder happen. Thank you so much.
Thank you.